anyway, to get started, I feel I need to do the PSA for the National Council for Preservation Education and explain, what that is. The National Council for Preservation Education is a national nonprofit organization founded to provide support for the development and improvement of historic preservation education programs at colleges and universities in the United States. We have 60 plus member institutions that are education programs offering degrees or certificates in historic preservation, cultural resource management, architectural heritage studies. Details about our members and our organization's member mission can be found at ncpe.us. The internship program, of which I am director, is a collaboration between the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. And the National Council for Preservation Education, and it's one of the initiatives of NCPE. More about the program can be found at the website preservenet.org, which is a database of online resources, including an active jobs board for professionals, students, academics, and the interested public in the areas of historic preservation and related areas of study. So I invite you to visit our websites and to view our recent videos on the National Council's YouTube channel, which can be found under the organization's full name, National Council for Preservation Education. And I've just uploaded a couple of days ago a video that a Tulane graduate student shot for us. And I have uploaded to my exhibitor booth at the National Association for African American Honors Programs conference. In it, Amani Mitchell-Wyatt does a wonderful job of explaining in about 4 minutes why she chose went from an art history major as an undergraduate into Tulane's Preservation Studies program and her career trajectory. So it's really wonderful. And so I want to introduce myself, Julie Johnson, to the director of the internship program of the National Council for Preservation Education. And my guest today, Porsha Dossie, who is staff historian with the National Park Service and a former intern with the internship program of the National Council. And today is an informal Q&A to sort of explore how Porsha came to this point in her wonderful career. Thanks, to the wonders of Zoom. So I just wanted to start with, I began with the National Council in 2017. And one of the things I remember in the series of applications that came in late in the year was seeing your application, I think, then, for the 2018 academic year. But what I wanted to ask you, before you came to the point of applying for an internship, how did you decide to study and major in history at the University of Central Florida? Why the University of Central Florida, and why history?
Okay, so I came to UCF, truly this is kind of out of an immature response to my parents wanting me to go to another school. And I said, you can't control me, I'm 17. And I ended up applying to UCF for history and poli-sci with the intent to actually become a lawyer. And I ended up having
That'll show them.
Right, I was like, and so I was, I got in, they gave me a few scholarships, which was really great. My parents came around because it was actually closer than the university they had wanted me to attend. And we had family in the area. So, it all worked out. But I had enough credits from, I was an AP scholar in high school. So I had enough credits to start as a second semester sophomore. So I started taking higher level history courses. And I had like ancient Greece and Hitler's Third Reich and some of these just other courses I wouldn't have gotten as a freshman. And there was a large research component in these courses. And just kind of taking that on, I was like, this is really exciting. This is historiography. What's that? And just, I really became more passionate about history. And eventually when I finished, by the time I finished, I decided that like I wanted to be a historian. That wasn't something I thought I could do when I had applied at 17. And once I had taken these courses, developed relationships with my professors, I was like, I want to do what you all do. And then by the time I got to grad school, I was like, actually slightly different. I think I want to work with the public. And I think I am actually now interested in historic preservation. And so I applied for a fellowship with the Smithsonian while I was in grad school, also at the University of Central Florida. Got a position at the African American Smithsonian. We partnered with the Park Service on a slavery kind of archival program. And I was like, oh, the National Park Service does history? Because I'm so familiar with the natural resources component of the system. And so learning about that and then liking a few of the Facebook pages is how I eventually came across a posting about NCPE and then decided to apply in what was my third to last semester in grad school. And then luckily I got the position at Park History.
That's wonderful. Did you apply for more than one position? Was this Park History one of several that you applied for? And was it your first choice?
It was my first choice, but I think there was a space where I could write up to maybe 3 or 4. So Park History was number 1. I had a position I applied for that was in Pennsylvania at one of our units there. I'm not remembering the name right now. And then I think there was another one in Georgia, probably with the southeastern region. But Park History was my first choice because I really was interested in the kind of proposal that Luann Jones, who's now my colleague, which is so weird to say because she started off as my supervisor, right, in my internship. And yeah, it was funny because she picked out my application because she recognized my thesis advisor's name as one of her colleagues from the Agricultural History Society. And was like, oh, Connie, this is Connie's student? And then we had a phone interview that went really well and they decided to select me. So
that's wonderful. That is so great. I did want to ask you, I remember when I was in high school, probably 17, and history was also my AP subject. And but thinking as an undergraduate going on to college, what would I do with a history degree? I really didn't have the background to understand or come to the realization, oh, that's what the National Park Service can do. Because I thought, well, what am I going to do? Like open up a history museum store or something like that? Right. Which now I think about, oh, what a brilliant idea that would have been. But so I didn't really have that kind of, background, enough, I guess, guidance, as a student. So it's so interesting to hear how you went in as, oh, I'll be a lawyer, poli-sci, blah, blah, blah. But so how did you start taking history courses? Was it just like one of the electives that you were doing or just because of your AP experience and you just few and then more and more and more and next thing you know, I'm a historian?
No, that's a really good question. So the way, so UCF is part of the public school system in Florida, and like there's a certain kind of, there's certain metrics you have to hit for certain majors. And so all incoming freshmen are usually supposed to take AMH 2010 and 2020, which is like the pre-Columbian to present day US history course. And because I had done so well on the AP US History exam, I tested out of that. And then I tested out of some European, I had AP Euro. So basically these courses that were offered to me since I was a history major were the higher electives. And so that's where the fun was for me. And I think because I had the opportunity so early to take those courses and they were really challenging. Like that was the first time I had to write, a research paper that was 20 pages and the first historiographical essay I had to write. And, you were expected to read like 2 books a week in the 4,000 level classes. And I was like, oh my God, but I really enjoyed it. And so I think that those first that first year, honestly, that first academic year is where I started to think about my options beyond law school. Like I stopped attending like the State Department and other places would come on and do their career fair, and I would go to those. And then after a while, I was like, I don't think I want to do that. I think I like going to archives and looking at primary sources, and my interest just really shifted because I was able to take those classes early on. And I think that was really formative for me. And then I'm a very determined person. I think I like to have a plan. I'm a little type A. And usually when I stick to something or I make a decision, I stick to it. And for this, I think I was so just taken with history and studying it that I was like, you know what? I'm going to figure out how to make this happen. And having professors that were really supportive and believed in me was really great and helped me make that decision as well.
That's wonderful. So going back to applying for the NCPE internship, I remember as a graduate student having to do it. I did an internship in Pittsburgh, helping a developer do tax act work. And I didn't even own a car at that time. So the whole sort of mechanics of picking up and moving from Ithaca, New York to Pittsburgh, finding a place to live, all that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to find out from you sort of what kind of challenges you overcame, or what did you have to confront maybe you were used to traveling around and moving around, but going from pretty much Central Florida to DC for your internship, what had to happen to make you walk in there and say, yeah, I can do this job?
So it was very challenging. It was not easy at all because I was a graduate teaching associate, and they allowed me to keep my position because my department saw how great of an opportunity this was for me, and they didn't want me to lose my stipend, which I appreciated. So while I was doing my internship, I was teaching 2 courses. Also, which comes with like grading and everything, and like doing that online and trying to maintain those relationships with students while I'm also working a job from 9 to 5. Getting to DC was a little difficult. My boyfriend at the time helped me drive up and bring my stuff up, which was really nice. My living accommodations fell through at the last minute, so I ended up staying with an aunt and had to sleep on her floor for a little bit, actually. We're talking about the challenges, and that was definitely a challenge. And eventually I had enough money where I could buy a nice little, I nicknamed it my Harry Potter cot. And I put it on the floor of her living room, and that's where I slept for the first part of my internship. And then when I came back for my second NCPE internship, that's also where I stayed. And then when I started my American Conservation Experience Fellowship, I was able to get my own place, and that was very nice.
I can imagine.
But yes, I think and I was also finishing my master's thesis while all of this was going on as well. So I don't regret any of that. I think that timeline, I was able to accomplish the things that I needed to accomplish, and it set me up, I think, eventually to get the position that I have now. So it was worth it.
Right.
But those were definitely the challenges. Also, I'd never seen snow before, and the first 2 months I was in DC, it snowed like crazy. So that was also, I had to go and finally buy a winter coat because in growing up in Miami, Florida specifically, the last time it snowed, I think Nixon was president. There was actual snow in Miami. So, and I definitely was not
around then.
Right. So coming to DC had its fair share of challenges, but I so much enjoyed the work that I was doing as a NCPE intern. I still enjoyed working with my students. I think it was worth it. It shaped me into the survivor I am now.
Right. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I did want to ask too about your experience, especially your first NCPE experience. Was there a particular project that they wanted you to work on, or were you more like sort of moving into a program of which you were one kind of a many and a sort of less project oriented. Maybe you could describe, that initial experience, and also what if you were hoping to get a particular product out of it. I find that true with interns today, not so much to burnish their CV, but well, that might be a part of it, but also I think to have something sort of tangible to point to as that they could point to sort of use as this is the result that I wanted to accomplish, and as a stepping stone to something else, either academically or professionally.
Yeah, so my position for the first NCPE internship I completed was a Teaching with Historic Places lesson plan. So that's a program that's been around the Park Service, I believe, since maybe 1992, at least the early 90s, if I'm getting the date wrong. And so these Teaching with Historic Places lesson plans are usually 40, 50, sometimes 60 pages. And the program has since moved away from that. And so my Teaching with Historic Places lesson plan was what's called now a lightning lesson. It's only about, I believe, usually 15 to 25 pages. So very, a lot less, what's the word I'm looking for? I think the change really came about because we realized that teachers are not going to have the time to do an in-depth lesson on the War of 1812. So we just want to give them some resources and connect our national park sites to that history, right? And so the lesson plan that I was tasked with was on African Americans in the War of 1812. And so my wheelhouse is more so, I definitely in undergrad did a lot of research on 19th century African American history, particularly in New Orleans, Louisiana. But since graduate school, definitely my research is more so 20th century civil rights, which factors in really well to my current position. So when I initially got the assignment, I was like, can I do this? But it was really fun to dive into the research, to go to the Library of Congress and look at the materials they had. And so over the course of those 10 weeks I was there, I completed the lesson plan, which looked at basically resistance from enslaved folks who decided to join with the British on what's now Tangier Island off the coast of Virginia, and looking at some of the military forts that were there, looking at some of the material culture and the archaeological sources that still remain. And it was really great. It's something that's now my portfolio. So if I decide to go back to teaching for whatever reason, or to focus more so on education, I can point to that, which is really nice. And it now lives on the Teaching with Historic Places website. And I was able to do the metadata for it, do a little social media push out. So yeah, it was a really, really good experience. And I'm probably going to do some more in the future as we collaborate with their office. So it's more civil rights lightning lessons to come. I think that's what we're moving towards.
And were you able to select that project, or was there an array of projects and you were able to select that particular one?
Oh, that's what was assigned to me.
I guess.
So the coordinator for that program at the time, she's no longer with us. She's actually at the Zen Education Project doing really great work. They kind of noticed that there were certain subjects that there just was not enough information on, or it wasn't diverse, or didn't really tell a comprehensive historical narrative. And so that's why the War of 1812 was chosen. And then I was chosen to work on it. Wonderful. So I didn't get to pick, but I really valued what I learned doing on the project. So it was cool.
And your second NCPE internship, did it follow directly from the first one, or was there a hiatus between the two?
There was a hiatus. I had to go back to UCF and graduate with my master's degree in May. So I had about, I think it was, so I finished, I came to DC in January. I finished the first week of April, and then I started my second position in June. So there was a bit of a hiatus period, but it was great because I came back and was like, I can focus. I'm not teaching. I pretty much am done with my thesis. I just had to, do some revisions. So that second internship was no longer working on the Teaching with Historic Places lesson plan, excuse me. It was on the African American Civil Rights Network, which is now the program I helped manage. So it was interesting. The educational component of the first one, I think, helped me just kind of learn the culture of the National Park Service and how things just sort of work and what operations are like. And then that second internship, I felt like essentially I was now park staff. I was leading meetings with political appointees. I was developing content already. We were working with OLCA, which is our Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, and I was doing a lot of that work. So yeah, there's a lot of variety in my NCPE internships, I will say.
Well, it sounds like you started out as sort of the typical intern, and this is my thinking. You need like 10 weeks of an internship just to feel like you know where the bathroom is and where to park and that sort of thing. But it sounded like sort of your second sort of 10-week that you got the opportunity to really delve into a subject that has become your sort of major area of interest, which is post World War II civil rights. And was that always so tell me what your thesis topic was, and is it related to the civil rights movement?
So I initially, when I was an undergrad, focused still on Black history, but it was the 19th century, and I was looking at both the chattel slave system and the antebellum period and kind of the afterlives of that system in the postbellum period through what is essentially the commercial sex trade in New Orleans. So how these women prior to the Civil War were abused during slavery, and then afterward in these brothels, men could then purchase the fantasy of the antebellum period. And so that thesis was well received, which was really nice, because when I brought it to my advisor, she was like, "You want to do what?" But the research I won a few awards for, and I thought that's what I would continue to do in grad school, since I had stayed at UCF and my advisor had agreed to be my master's thesis advisor. But then in the wake of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling being murdered by the police, I had a conversation with my mom, and she brought up Arthur McDuffie and was like, all of the stuff that's happening, it reminds me of 30, 40 years ago, what we were experiencing. And being from Miami, it's party, party, party. It's almost like the city wants to be ahistorical.
Yeah.
And so hearing my mom talk about what was essentially a race riot in 1980, I was like, what is that? What are you talking about? And she talked about her experience of, being marched by the National Guard to and from school. And and my family's very funny. I think a lot of people who attempt to do oral histories with their families run into this, but your family is always like, oh, this isn't important. And then they tell you something that's very important and historically relevant. So just having that conversation with her, I was like, I think this is what I want to write my thesis on. And so I started diving into civil rights literature, post-civil rights literature, and then eventually my thesis began to take shape. And so I looked at a confluence of New Deal era legislation, police reform, and just kind of all of these issues that eventually led to Miami's Black population erupting into racial violence. And so as that concerns like the work I do now, I would say that I have a context of the long civil rights movement. So that research I did in undergrad, I understand the 19th century and the civil rights battle there for justice. The research I've had to do now as part of being in the program has shaped that as well. And then looking beyond that 1968 period, I understand that this is an ongoing struggle for racial justice. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think writing both of those theses has really helped me in my position now, for sure.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about you are the program historian
Mhm.
with the National Civil Rights, am I doing that right? National Civil Rights Network? Is that
African American Civil Rights Network.
right? Right. Thank you. So tell me about the network and what's involved in it.
So, okay, the network was signed into law in January of 2018, actually, as I was beginning my first NCPE internship, but we weren't able to really prop the network up and roll it out until a year later. And by that time, I was an ACE fellow and continuing that work that I had started as a NCPE intern that's previous summer, excuse me. And so the network essentially came to the Park Service and has charged us with commemorating the people, places, and events of the African American civil rights movement. And so that's through designating properties, facilities, and programs as members of the network, as well as creating educational content, doing public outreach, and coordinating events as well. And so obviously the pandemic has impacted some of this work, unfortunately. But we still have been doing our public outreach events. So I have had a presentation every single week, multiple presentations since September, as well as just participating on calls and attending virtual conferences and talking about the network and just getting people really interested, because we do sunset, I believe, in 2024. So we want to designate as many sites as possible and kind of bring that information to the public, because a lot of folks, I think, focus on Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama, which those are obviously sites of the Black freedom struggle. But there's no corner of this country that the movement did not reach. And we want to make sure those stories are told so that we create this really comprehensive understanding of the movement. And that's really been our goal. And we've been very adamant about getting those little known sites onto the network.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely been what I've been working on for the past 7 months in particular, since I started this official federal position.
So going back to that, I didn't mean to jump ahead, to this, but how did you get your current position? And is working as part of the network a big part of it, or just one of a myriad of duties and responsibilities that you have?
So this position, I feel very lucky. I think a lot of a large part of getting into the federal government, I think, is luck, because there are so many barriers in place. And even if I think very qualified people who are much smarter than me apply for these jobs all the time and they don't get them because of just the way the system is set up. And I feel very lucky that my internships, as well as the fellowship I eventually did, allowed me to get my foot in the door, because that's really what NCPE did. It allowed me to build relationships with folks across the Park Service, because while I was based in Park History, we do a lot of collaboration across the Cultural Resources Directorate. And so I was able to, people were very much looking out for me when they saw that a term position was opening up. They're like, Porsha, we'd love for you to stay, so here, apply for this. And so that was really, really great. But this specific position was, I think, supposed to come out in 2018, but there have been a number of hiring freezes, which is another issue when you apply for federal government jobs, is these hiring freezes that come out of nowhere.
Shutdowns,
Yeah.
shutdowns, pandemics, yes.
Yeah, I experienced 2 shutdowns.
Yeah.
My first NCPE, I started a few days late because there was a shutdown. And then for my ACE fellowship, there was a shutdown later that year. And that was the longer of the shutdowns. So yeah, that's a great point. So there were times where I was like, do I want to stay with the federal government? This is a little stressful, though I was reassured multiple times that my experiences were not the norm. And we don't need to get into why they were not the norm. I think we know, but so it was really luck that when the position finally became available, that I was in the right place in the, and it was just the right time for me to apply. And fortunately, there was an issue with the job posting, and so it closed. So I essentially had gotten the position, and then HR said there was an issue with the server and that nobody could be hired. And we had to repost the Park Service had to repost the job. And so I applied again because they encouraged me to apply again. And there's a lot. I would love to one day do a presentation on how to apply for federal government jobs, because if you leave one thing off your resume, it's invalidated. It's very frustrating, but I got the position in the beginning of March of this year, did a lot of paperwork. That process is a process in itself. And the first day of my start date, I came in, I took my oath, did my orientation. And then when I went to my supervisor, she said, "We are shutting down because we are now in lockdown. So see you hopefully, Porsha, in a couple of months." And so really my entire career now in federal service has been at home these past, I guess 8 months now, because it's November. But
so
yeah,
I do want to ask this my burning question before I go on and ask a real question. So, do you have a uniform and a Smokey Bear hat?
Oh, this is one of the things that I thought once I was in, that I would have the uniform and all of these things. And so I'm not a ranger. I don't work at a park. So I unfortunately, I don't have the accoutrements, which disappoints me, because I really thought I could order I've been told that yes, you can order the green and gray, but I think there would be an out-of-pocket cost. So maybe if I am transferred to a park unit, I can really live my full Park Service fantasy. That would be really nice, but I don't even have a lanyard because we shut down so quickly that I didn't even get. So, it's okay.
Yeah.
When we are finally back in the office, I'll even be able to update my laptop, my PIV card. There's so much that just did not take place.
Right. So go. Well, that's what I want to know. Does everybody have? But my other question, and for people who may not be aware, what does Park History do?
So Park History is one of actually the oldest programs in the National Park Service. So we've been around since the 1930s. And essentially, when it was created, the goal was to preserve the park's history, because it was very clear by that point, because Park Service was founded in 1916. I think we come about, 15 years later in 1931. So this idea that the Park Service needs to maintain its history and be able to tell its story, and as new units are being added, that they understand that history, and that their history in turn is kept as part of the service. And so we have since branched out in a lot of ways in our nearly 100-year history, like 90-year history. And we are very much involved in the Section 106 process now. And I'm not going to get into the weeds of Section 106, but we are a part of that process for the parks. So not every park has completed Section 106. And so we're now at 423 units. So those parks are writing they're doing all their documentation, and then we're making sure that documentation is accurate. And we also are the Federal Preservation Office for the Park Service. So our Chief Historian, Terkaya Lowe, serves as Federal Preservation Officer. So she then approves all of that. So when you asked if most of my work is the Civil Rights Network, it is, but I'm now transitioning to working on national park documentation efforts. So I'll be assisting Kelly, who's also our national coordinator for the network, on that part of the process. So I've been in a lot of training for Section 106, and my brain is still spinning with all the acronyms. But yeah, so we are very much involved in that. Our other programs besides the network are the World War II Heritage Cities program, as well as the oral history program and the maritime heritage. So we wear a lot of hats for sure. And I think once I am more versed in some of these things and I complete my training, I will also be part of maritime as well as World War II.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. No, that's so interesting to see the trajectory. And so is it that you get your job with the National Parks, get a job with the National Park Service, you make it through all the craziness, because whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So and then they say, hey, you can do even more and do even more and do even more. So it's like, let's pile it on. So it truly is got to be strong.
Yes, definitely. There are times where I'm like, do I know what I'm doing? You definitely feel imposter syndrome because I am comparatively young, not calling my colleagues old, but I am comparatively younger than them in a lot of ways. I'm a recent, grad and things. And I'm like, do I know what I'm doing? Am I making sense? Or like they're talking about something and I'm like, there were 14 acronyms in there and I don't know what most of them mean. And so, it's definitely like you are thrown in and you just got to try to swim. And according to my performance evaluation the other week, I am swimming. Like I'm showing up, I'm doing my job, I'm asking questions when I don't know the answer so that I can know the answer. And yeah, I think just the nature of being a staff historian, you have to be flexible. And that's just kind of the nature of doing the work. And I think my prior experiences, both in my internships and fellowships, and also surviving the gauntlet of grad school, I know how to be flexible.
Right.
And so I enjoy my work, but yes, it is a lot of work in a lot of ways. So.
Well, I am curious, about the African American Civil Rights Network. It's fascinating to me. And I think what's interesting to was what you said about it sunsetting. And was there a feeling about we talk about the civil rights as a period of time that at the civil and in terms of history, there was a period of time like it would have started and it ended. But what about today? And so I'm thinking about, well, this is like, like a never-ending story. So why is the network sunsetting? Or if you don't have a response for that, because it's above your pay grade, is what your thoughts and feelings about bringing in so the whole civil rights movement in its entirety into that story.
So it sunsets because typically these commemorative programs, that's just what they do. This was loosely based on the Network to Freedom, which was a program that came to the Park Service, I think in 1999 or 2000. And so my understanding is that it's a budget related thing. But to your point about the fact that the civil rights movement, like clearly our community is still fighting for justice in 2020. And that's been my issue with commemorative programs just in general. I think commemoration as a whole means like, oh, look, we won, cheer, yay, it's done. Dr. King died for our sins. It's like that man did not die for our sins. He was assassinated. And
I shouldn't laugh. It's just you're right. Sorry. Jesus, and then everything is better. Yeah.
Right. And that's the popular narrative of the civil rights movement. People don't want to talk about the difficulty of facing the fact that Dr. King and the civil rights movement was not popular. The modern iteration of the movement from 1954 to 1968, he was viewed as an enemy of the state, right? And yes. The movement was this oppositional force that was trying to harm good white working people.
J. Edgar Hoover.
Thank you. COINTELPRO. I mean, so our goal with this network, that because Kelly and I have our internal conversations about this, is that the movement has not ended. in that we want our program to serve as a bridge between the past and the present, to see those similarities, to have that knowledge is power. So seeing how the iteration in that period, 1954 to 1968, for our network, the legislation actually moves it back to 1939. And I'll get into that in a little bit if we have time. But this idea that there is a connection between then and now, and that within that connection, there is a truth, there is a history that we can depend on to guide us forward. And so that's definitely been our goal, because other commemorative programs, it's this celebration. It's this, okay, we're America. We're great. We're a democracy. This is it. And at the time, you have the USSR saying, look, you guys lynch Black people. And that's funny that you're taking this moral high ground. And so we want that to also be included. We have some upcoming webinars, one from a program manager at the University of South Carolina in their civil rights department, talking about white backlash to the civil rights movement, because I think people are comfortable with this, oh, you know, it was an interracial movement, and like my grandmother says she was at the March on Washington. It's like, that may be true, but other people's grandmothers were spitting on Ruby Bridges, and Black people just trying to go to an integrated school. So we don't want to shy away from that history. We want to also talk about Black power and kind of the evolution of the civil rights movement into that as well. And you know, it's tough, because I think, especially within our current administration, some people are uncomfortable with those truths. They want civil rights history to fit into a neat little box. And it's just not possible, because the movement itself was multifaceted. You had leaders who did not agree with Dr. King's nonviolent stance. You had Robert F. Williams. You then obviously have the Black Power part of the movement, where you have the Black Panthers, you have us. So it's a very complex history that, again, does not fit neatly into that 1954 to 1968 or that 1939 to 1968. My thesis, in a lot of ways, proves that as well. And so we're not blind to the fact that there's some issues with the program and this idea of commemoration.
Right. So fascinating to talk about. I remember being at a conference, probably was down in New York, early in 2002, and the state archivist of the New York State Archives was talking about how their staff was in Manhattan on September 12th, 2001, collecting oral histories and items from the destruction of the World Trade Center. So for an organization like the New York State Archives, which is so used to dealing with ephemera from, 1600s or even certainly earlier, they became very involved in, I'll call current history, or evolving before your very eyes history. And I wondered, you can wear your hat as a Park Service staff historian or citizen historian, what is the role of people who are interested in history in current events? How do we document, what happens, in the present time? How do we preserve it? And then how do we interpret it? And do you think that interpretation just changes if you're looking back at, let's say 9/11 from, a week later versus 10 years later versus 100 years later? I just wondered if you had sort of thoughts on that. There's so much, at least this year, that feels so momentous, and we're living in it, right? And a pandemic and economic complete destruction and this presidency, and then this election, and Black Lives Matter, and then white supremacists. It just seems like it's this entire year has felt like a one of extreme historical significance.
Yes, I agree completely. I am a millennial, so I'm going to reference a meme. There's a really good meme going around, and it's a young man covering his like head in his hand, and it says, "I'm tired of waking up and living through another historical event." And it's it's so relatable.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, in 1 year, you didn't even bring up the aliens that the federal
Oh,
government says, yeah, there's the aliens. That was back in April.
right. Oh, that's April was 20
A
years ago.
lifetime, you
Yeah,
know?
really, truly. It's like every day is a new lifetime. And
Absolutely.
speaking of memes, it's like every time I look at anything social media, it's like, uh, did did your chart say that you were going to have aliens? Like, yes, we can mark that off. It's just like, what other crazy thing.
Yeah, exactly. So bringing it back to your other questions, I definitely believe that in my training as a historian, it feels like we are often, reprimanded to not bring the past or bring the present into the past,
Mhm.
and to that there's value in this kind of long durée look at change over time, and that time brings perspective. And in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, that's absolutely true. But I think we are remiss, um, particularly as it concerns social justice, to not try to just even be having these conversations, because I think about how when I was so I was in, I believe, undergraduate. I was still an undergraduate when Trayvon Martin was killed. And so, right, I went to school in Central Florida at UCF. Sanford, he was from Miami, but he was murdered in Sanford, which is right there. It's a 25-minute drive from campus in Seminole County. And there, people were so, it felt like uncomfortable to put his death in the context of Emmett Till
Mhm.
and all of the other young Black men who have been killed with impunity by law enforcement, the state, or white private citizens.
Mhm.
And I think it's important that we, one, yes, have conversations, but there's going to be an inability to really have reconciliation if we're not trying to connect the present with the past. And I hope that, and I say this all as a private citizen, I've taken my Park Service hat, Smokey Bear hat off, because also within the Park Service, since we are a federal agency, there are so many things that we just aren't able to touch or get involved in or comment on. And I took my NPS ethics, training, and I understand that we have to be objective.
Mhm.
But I would argue that objectivity is not real, and that we all bring perspectives in
Right.
a lot of ways that shapes how we perceive the world and how we interact with it. And historians have to do a better job of also understanding that we are citizens of this country. We are all on this earth together. And if we are going to move forward, particularly as it concerns difficult history, terrorism, racism, white supremacy, et cetera, we have to do the work. And I think in a lot of ways that groundwork has been laid for us if we look back in time and see how we cannot make those same mistakes. And I think history has also been a tool of oppression and a tool of the state to control narratives. And I think if we as a profession did a better job of interacting with the public, um, we would have a fighting chance against a lot of misinformation and fake news. So
Right.
that's
Well,
my
I think that's also why we sometimes see these efforts, primarily social media, but others in terms of guerrilla history.
Mhm.
It's because people feel that the objectivity and the distance that we um, impose on what is history isn't sufficient
Mhm.
uh, to truly understand what's happening in the world today. And as I said, the New York State Archives office was in Manhattan at ground zero 24 hours after that happened. They weren't waiting.
Yeah.
So they weren't waiting then. So why wait now? You know, before going to the street corner where George Floyd was murdered, and to commemorate or to collect materials, to collect oral history.
Steps in, right? Because you saw all those murals come about.
Yes.
The graveyard that was there where they were remembering other folks who lost their lives. And
exactly.
And I will say that while the Park Service has not gotten involved in that effort necessarily, there's a unit there, name is escaping me, but they have been in talks with community groups and leaders about some kind of preservation effort that the Park Service could potentially be a part of. And so they looked at the Civil Rights Network to see if maybe we had that 1939 to 1968 time period from the legislation that said only, sites connected to this time period can be a part of the network. That's no longer the case. It's actually only for National Park Service units now. So we can have sites from the public that are from as recent as 2020, which is great. So I'm hoping that we are able to support their efforts on the ground in Minneapolis. And but we'll see. We'll see if maybe with the new administration that can take flight again, because it's since died down, unfortunately. But it feels like the Park Service is often cautioned against doing that kind of work, and it's on individual staff members who are already in the community doing community preservation efforts and things of that nature who start bringing that conversation within the agency.
Yeah. I just also to, wearing the historic preservation hat and going back to that and speaking about that particular, street corner in South Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered. It is a street corner. I mean, it's like an intersection.
Yeah.
And so we can also talk about the issue of issues like integrity and significance, and how do we deal with places that are basically public spaces that are changing and evolving over time. I mean, it's one thing to have a specific property, especially if it's in federal ownership or somehow government ownership, but this is a street corner
intersection.
Yeah, exactly. And do we need to, as preservationists, take a look at how we are designating, or is designating too loaded a word in our field, or somehow I'm not even sure what the alternative would be, in something as ever changing and evolving as someplace like that. Again, this is more like the citizen historic preservationists. We all have difficulties with those terms, like what does that mean, integrity and National Register nomination form, and we've all had kind of difficulties with. But it's so important. Why can't it be? Because it's lost its significance, or areas of significance, or time periods of significance, and yet we have so many locations and sites that obviously are historically important that may not meet the criteria. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about this sort of ever evolving and almost transitory sites that we're seen as historically significant now. How do we sort of hold on to that, document that for future generations to understand?
That is a really great question. You've asked me a lot of really good questions, and I wish I was more articulate. But I think that definitely, and I've been thinking a lot about the role of the Park Service and just the role of these mainstream institutions and how so many grassroots efforts are already taking place, and how sometimes, and I'm not specifying the Park Service in this, but other agencies and orgs will come in and kind of start dictating how that work should be and how it should look like. And I think these communities already know and have a good idea of what works for them and what they would like to do, and that we have to do a better job of not even just sharing authority, but letting that authority rest with them and how they feel they should move forward. There's a lot of talk about abolishing the National Register. I remember going to NCPH maybe last year, and that, I mean, people were incensed when this professor, I think he might actually be at the University of Minnesota, said that in a Q&A. And I think there's no easy, I think it's good that the field is talking and there is fighting and people are so passionate about this, because there are other ways of moving forward beyond, I think, being on the National Register, because I'm here to tell you that the National Register is a planning document for the federal government. It is not here to protect anything. It is for the federal government to say, you know what, we want to build here. Let's see if there's going to be any adverse effect. You know what? All right, there's not. Move it over so we can build some new office buildings.
Right.
So I think it's very valid for a lot of, especially for communities of color who are greatly impacted by this, to be suspicious and not interested in any form of designation, really. Or if they are, they should be the ones to dictate what that looks like. Because I'm not in Minneapolis on the ground. I have no idea. I've seen all those images online, the videos, but who am I to say, just because I'm with the Park Service, we want you to be in the African American Civil Rights Network. We think you'd be a good fit. This is how we can support you. And they have every right to say, no, that doesn't work for us. That's not how we want this to be preserved and how we want this to be memorialized.
In a way, I mean, we have a model for that with THPOs, with the Tribal Historic Preservation, which is a bureaucratic nightmare in and of itself, but sort of authority has been ceded to the tribal offices. So we do have a model for, let's say, on the ground community involvement. So how, I'm assuming that, I shouldn't assume, that authority or responsibility can be shared, you know, with communities, and maybe this means more decentralization.
Yes, I think that's definitely a way forward. I do have a webinar I have to attend that just started, so I guess this will be my. I'm having such a nice time talking to you.
Oh, that seems lovely.
But I will say, yeah, I do believe that the THPOs are a great example, but also, yes, a bureaucratic nightmare. In some cases, I think it is important that we, I know I'm saying this a lot, but we have to have these ongoing conversations. And I think coming from the National Park Service, where we are often not trusted, we are seen as the great arm of the state coming in and telling people what to do, that we have to do a better job of listening and figuring out a way to compromise. And I don't know what that looks like, because I am so new to the service and I'm still learning. And again, smarter people than I have come up with way better solutions. But I think it can look like designating to the Civil Rights Network or supporting folks in getting on the National Register and doing that documentation. It can also look like a guerrilla memory project that exists on a TikTok. And if that's what people want to do, then they're well within their right to do that, because I firmly believe those on the ground know better what to do, and that my position and what I do at the Park Service is finding resources to support them. So
excellent. That's a good wrap up.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. This was fantastic.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking about everything I learned as a NCPE intern, and the fact that I don't think I'd be with the Park Service today if it wasn't for this internship and all the good work you all do.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. So that little clip will be our little promo commercial.
Love that. I hire me for all your advertising.
Oh yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I will let you get away, and thank you so much. This is fantastic.
Yep. All right. Take care.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye. think I'm going to end this.